One of the most interesting movies of 2025 has officially released in theaters. Mickey 17 is directed by Bong Joon-ho and is, of course, starring Robert Pattinson, Mark Ruffalo, and Stephen Yeun. This movie is about a person named Mickey who volunteers to become an expendable, a person who helps society progress forward by dying and dying. He's in charge of helping a group of humanity colonize a brand new world. So we're going to talk about it, and if you, as a Christian, should watch it right now. Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm your host Tim, and we exist to help Christians live in the world, not of the world, by utilizing our convictions in the movies and shows we watch. Mickey 17 is rated R for violence throughout, language throughout the entire movie, as well as, of course, sexual content and some drug material as well. So we're going to go over the convictions you may have in watching this film, as well as any theological themes that might be present in Mickey 17, and give you my own personal thoughts on the movie with a personal review. Without further ado, let's head over to the Christian Conviction Meter. Now, in case this is your first time here watching the channel, the Christian Conviction Meter is split into 5 categories, 5 areas of convictions that ultimately may prevent you, distract you from your relationship with Jesus. These areas were rated from 0 to 5, 5 being extreme and better use caution, 0 being there's nothing in here to worry about that particular category. This is a guide, a tool, a resource to help you find good movies to watch that doesn't compromise your relationship with Jesus. Starting off with violence and gore, there's a decent amount of this film. I mean, it is a rated R movie, so you're gonna have this stuff present. And specifically, there's a lot of different things, from a lot of shooting and stabbing, and there's some blood, and I mean, this is about a guy who dies repeatedly, like multiple different ways, and it can get pretty and kind of not necessarily super gruesome, but pretty gruesome at some points. There's at one point where a hand is cut off and it just sails into space. There's a moment where a guy spits out another guy's ear that he cut off. There's some violence in here of punching, kicking, like I said, shooting earlier. There's like a knife fight that happens that's kind of off screen as well. But there's a decent amount of violence and blood throughout this entire film. I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 on the conviction meter. The next category of lust, and this one out of all the categories shocked me the most. I actually made a stupid move and forgot to look at the parent guide for myself before watching this movie, and there's a lot of sexual content in this movie. The biggest thing to note is there is a sex scene within this movie. Now, I do want to preface that there is no explicit nudity shown within that, but we can tell based off multiple different sensory things that they are in the act of sex. And so there is these things that take place within the film. This is also a very sexually referenced film. There's jokes about the film of different positions. There's references to, hey, you know, we will have a time to repopulate and do natural, all that other stuff, right? And so there's a lot in this film in terms of like sexual innuendos, sexual content. But again, there is no nudity except for one scene when Mickey is reprinting and his butt is shown because he falls out of the printer. And other than that, like, there's nothing explicitly shown. There is moments of passionate kissing. There is also a moment where a woman kind of reaches into a guy's pants, and also the insinuation of a potential threesome. So there are these things to note. There's a lot in here, and it completely caught me off guard. And so that being said, I hate using halves, but because nothing is shown here explicitly, like none of the genital areas are shown by either sex, by either gender, it's going to be a 4.5 out of 5 on the conviction meter. I don't like using halves, just say that out of the way, but I feel like this movie definitely calls for it, because it's not explicitly a 5 out of 5, because like I said, None of the specific areas to worry about are shown, but a lot is implied, and a lot, even without those things, is still done in this film. Moving on to substances. Now, there is no alcohol and there is no like cigarettes or tobacco use, but there is the use of Oxycontin throughout this entire movie. And so people talking about it, there even is like some dealing of Oxycontin within the film. There is even a moment within this movie where we see the effects of it on a person. They're kind of high, lucid, not all there compared to a natural sober state. But other than that, that's about it, right? It is a here and there part of the plot. It's not specific every single time this is a part of the movie, like the last category. So for that reason, it's going to be a 3 out of 5 for here. In terms of profanity, there is over 60 uses of the F-bomb. Sometimes it's said even 3 times in a single sentence. And I'll just shoot you straight, it did not make any sense in the world. But in all seriousness, there is a ton of uses of the F-bomb. SH word is used, The DA word is used, I believe, a few times. I think a BI word is used at least once in the film. And other than that, that's about it. But there's a ton of uses of the F-bomb. And so for that reason, it's going to be a 5 out of 5 here for language. And on to the last category, which is intense and horror sequencing. Once again, there is no horror contained within this film. Even though it is a rated R project, horror is not the category that it's focusing on. But there is a lot of intense sequencing within this film. Like I said in Violence and Gore, this movie is about a guy essentially being used for science and dying multitude of deaths, whether it's by poison or toxins or just dying in many, many ways. And so there is a lot of death contained within this film. At the same time, too, there's a sequence that happens within the film pretty early on where you don't see what happens, but you do hear a guy getting cut by a chainsaw. Again, you don't see that happen, but it is contained within the film. At the same time as well, there's just a lot of intense sequencing, intense moments, particularly by like the kind of grand commander leader. He's a very intense figure. Also, that is some allegory of a certain political figure, I'm sure. On top of that, there is just some very ugly, creepy looking creatures, if I'm being honest. They're not super duper pleasant. This is going to be a 4 out of 5 on this particular area. It's not as intense as some other rated R films, and it doesn't have any horror within it, but there is a decent amount of intense sequences. So with that being said, it's a 20.5 out of 25. Again, I don't like to use halves, but this will be a special exception because of just the nature of this film. But this is pretty high on the conviction meter, so if any of these are areas that you're not a big fan of, I know profanity is a 5 out of 5, so if that's an area you're a little unsure about, I'd say don't worry, don't compromise your convictions. Don't worry about seeing this film. With that being said, though, let's move on to some theological themes that are present within Mickey 17. And this might just be my personal thought process. I don't know if this is the actual allegory that is being presented, but it might just be my perspective from watching this film. There seems to be an aspect of cultural Christianity within this movie. So a group of people within the film follow a church, company, organization, right? And they praise the Lord. There's a song about how they're journeying to the promised land. I don't remember if that is an explicitly Christian song, but the reason I say it's cultural Christianity is because of the fact that they say one thing but do the complete opposite. What I mean by that is there is a moment within the film where a certain character who's a part of this church, a part of this worship of the Lord, who says that reprinting humans and doing these is demonic and it's from Satan. but let's use it. And so there's that weird dichotomy of their actions are speaking louder than words, and their actions don't reflect what would be considered true Christianity. There is nothing that explicitly states that this is Christian allegory. I do want to preface that right off the bat. There was nothing explicitly showcasing Jesus, showcasing the cross, showcasing the big C church, right, that we're all a part of as Christians, as followers of Jesus. But there is some sort of pseudo-religious tone to the film that we have to keep in mind. At the same time as well, this movie does deal a lot with the act of humans recreating humans. So the whole point of the movie is about how Expendables were created. It was a project done by some scientists, essentially to play God by creating and recreating humans. Now, obviously, in the film, they're not able to recreate memories or personality, but they're able to recreate bodies, right? And so, knowing, obviously, that as Christians, we believe that God is the one who breathed life into Adam and who breathed life into Eve. God is the creator of all things, the creator of you and me. And so the fact of a human or a group of humans, right, who are creating living, breathing, or reprinting living, breathing organisms may rub some people the wrong way. It may feel a bit icky for some of us in watching this film. That being said, they do kind of touch on the reality of, is this ethical? Is this not ethical? And again, there is some religious tones within that and some people bringing up religion within that. But again, I don't know if that area, along with what I talked about being cultural Christianity, is Christian allegory. It may just be religiosity allegory or religious allegory. Those are things to keep in mind. If these are areas you're not comfortable with, I would say don't worry about watching the film. It is time for our personal review. Overall, this is one of the weirdest movies I have watched in quite some time. He's not a director I'm super familiar with. The last movie I watched of his was Snowpiercer, and that was a weird movie. This one makes that movie a walk in the park because this one is just so weird and so outlandish, but it works in terms of that story. Robert Pattinson, I think, does a really solid job playing multiple versions of the same character. The story and the idea is pretty good. I 100% see what they were trying to capture, right? I don't think this film 100% works for me. There are things like the amount of allegory and also just the pretty intense sexual nature of this film that makes me not necessarily enjoy it as much. I do appreciate what they were trying to do, what they were trying to go for, but it's not my type of film. It's not a film that I probably am going to rewatch in the near future. It may be a really long time before I do, even if so. But the story's pretty solid. The pacing's okay. There's a lot of exposition that is needed because this is such a wacky and kind of brand new concept that they do have to do a lot of explaining. And so there is that, but it's definitely one of the more wacky films I've seen as of late. So I'm going to give this a 6.9 out of 10. It's decent, but it's not great, but it's also not really terrible. As a reminder, it's a 20.5 out of 25 on the Christian conviction meter. I gave it a 6.9 out of 10. This film is interesting, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've seen Mickey 17, let's chat about the movie down in the comments. And while you're there, consider hitting that like button and subscribing, doing all that good stuff. It just helps send us out into the algorithm so that we can reach more Christians to help them utilize their convictions to follow Jesus better. That's our ultimate goal and purpose of the channel. So it would really help us out if you can do those things there. That being said though, before we go, there are a few review suggestions over to the side of me here of some videos that you might be interested in that YouTube's recommending to you. So feel free to check those out. We'll see you all in the next one.